My name is Commissioner Raquel Regalado. I represent District 7. We're talking about an item that is on the county agenda for our November 1st meeting. We are recording this session. We're happy for those who are participating live, but if you're seeing this after the fact, thank you for joining us. And really the purpose of it is to drill down on the item. I know that we all know what an efficiency is, and we all know what an in-law quarter is, but you know what's important about this meeting is we're going to be explaining this item, right, which is not a legalization of anything extreme. In fact, I think it's a very thoughtful item after a lot of work and a lot of investigation as to what's actually happening and how we can legalize it. And we have a lot of broad support. So I wanted some folks to talk about, you know, kind of the different perspectives of it. But I think we first need to start explaining, you know, beyond what you think you know about efficiencies and granny flats and in-law quarters, what this particular item is trying to do at the county. And then we'll talk about kind of what led us to decide on this particular path. So I think that brings us to Nathan.
All right, so let me share my screen. Oh, I'm disabled. Somebody needs to.
Let me check.
Let's try again here. Share screen. I have the share button, but for some reason it's not letting me share.
Now you are a co-host.
All right, let me try that again. Oh, perfect. Okay.
Here we go. All right, so the caveat, you know, before Nathan starts, I just want to say that I really do believe that done correctly, this can really work. So that's your cue.
Awesome, thank you. I appreciate it. And you know, and I think you're absolutely right. I think we did do this correctly. And there's some interesting guiding principles in the comp plan that tell us to do it, but also tell us to do it properly. And I want everybody to understand that and have that context as well. So let me just first start off with the main policy in our comp plan, which we've had for years, which authorizes these ADUs. And this is the policy here on the right side of your screen, is on lots that are 7,500 square feet or greater, you can have 400 to 800 square feet. And you know, this has been a policy for a while. In fact, it's a pretty strong policy too, because the last sentence here also clearly indicates that it's not counted towards density. It's truly an ancillary dwelling unit. And from a planning perspective, it's a single family home is almost inherent to have, in certain cases, these type of uses. Historically in the United States, we've had this, especially up north, for a very long time. And Commissioner, you use some of the more unique terms or maybe local terms. So this is the guiding policy for ADUs. But there's other policies in the comprehensive plan that really support the county's efforts into thinking more creatively with regards to housing, and also policies that guide us to ensure that whatever we do, we make sure that it doesn't negatively affect the character of the neighborhood, which is why we were very cautious in how we crafted the ordinance. So policy 4C on your top right is a general policy that that guides us to really protect the neighborhood with such things as density, traffic, and the overall character and scale of the neighborhood. So we really thought about that in some of these, in many components of this ordinance, and we're going to go through those, and we're going to explain why we put those controls in. And of course, the housing element has us looking at streamlining building permit processes and streamlining approvals, which is why we decided we really want to stay away from public hearings and from a long, arduous process. Homeowners should have the right to develop pretty quickly, as long as they meet all the requirements. And of course, you know, our comp plan directs us, it's a shall, that's LU9N. The county shall continue to update its land development code on a regular basis to update CDMP policies and deficiencies in our conditions. So I think this is a prime example of a ordinance that is done respectfully and at the right time. So the two major components, again, of the ordinance, 7,500 square foot minimum lot, and to provide for aesthetic controls. We have two different types of accessory unit. ADUs, which are accessory units that you can rent, and guest houses, which are intended for families and gratuitous guests. We wanted to just have one type of ADU, but our code currently allows for guest houses in estates. And we didn't want to trample on those existing privileges. So we added on to the guest houses, the ADU. So the differences between ADU with regards to minimum lot size is the same minimum of 7,500 square feet that goes to the comp plan. Additionally, the 400 to 800 square foot of the for the ADU is maintained. However, in properties that are currently zoned estate and agriculture, they have the privilege of building a larger guest house greater than 800 square feet, so as long as they meet the rear lot coverage and setbacks. Again, that was already in the code. We didn't want to remove that privilege for estate and agricultural lots. Maximum number of accessory units in all cases is 1. So this is really the meat of, I think, this presentation, which are the standards that govern these provisions. So the first one, and it is consistent with both the ADU and the guest house, is that in order to prevent overcrowding, we are permitting 2 people per bedroom, excluding children under 3. Parking, 1 additional space. However, if you're in proximity to a transit corridor or a major corridor that's 660 feet to the corridor, you're not required to have that additional parking space. Additionally, we're only permitting an additional 2 vehicles that are associated with the ancillary dwelling unit. Architectural features. We wrestled with this a little bit because we want to spur creativity, but the comp plan does require that these units be generally consistent with the neighborhood. So we do require, as part of the permit review, an analysis of the aesthetics of the home. Similar materials and architectural treatments need to be used in the structure. Again, the height of the unit has to be equal to the maximum height of the building or less. The entrances to attached units can't be visible from the road as well. So we don't want to start giving the appearance of duplexes. So the side, you had to have like a side door or a door further either in the backyard. Again, it's to give the appearance of a single family home from the front. The detached unit in the back obviously can have a little more flexibility. It's not seen from the right of way. Zoning standards. The setbacks, the lot coverage remains the same for the accessory structure, whether it's attached or detached. And this was, I think this is, to counter, I think, some of the concerns that, oh, we're overcrowding, we're going to encroach on the neighbor's property. No, the answer is clearly no, because there is no additional privilege to encroach onto the neighbor's property. Again, it maintains the same standards we have for primary structures, and if it's detached, it will follow the same regulations as for accessory structures. Now, that doesn't prohibit an applicant or a property owner from coming in to get an administrative adjustment on a setback or lot coverage, or a public hearing for an adjustment. And that's the same privilege allotted to any single family home that they can do right now. So again, the massing and the square footage that you can potentially put on the property remains the same as what you can do today. That goes through both the attached and the detached. From an environmental point of view, it's also important that we maintain those setbacks and lot coverage, because that maintains the same ability for the site to retain stormwater. And as part of the building permit review, there's a chapter 11C review, which is stormwater for an elevate, sorry, not stormwater, but flood elevation review. And skip over that part, and we'll get, I think we'll close with that part, which is enforcement. I know there'll be some discussion on that, but I just wanted to give some examples. Alex from planning put these together, but this is an example of a potential ADU that's attached. You can see the door is on the side. This is a 75 by 100 foot, so an 8,000 square foot size lot, and you have a 420 square foot ADU in addition to a 1,600 square foot unit. This meets code. It meets the 35% open space requirement. So this would be a privilege that we could afford homeowners under this ordinance. Again, this is an example of detached unit. So with this example here, we looked at a parcel that actually has a pool. In this case, we made an assumption, okay, if they wanted to fill in their pool and do an ADU, or if the pool wasn't there, just to give a relative size of the ADU compared to that pool, a 460 square foot ADU is really not that intrusive when you're looking at this from a massing point of view. So 460 square feet, this is something, again, that meets code, meets setbacks. And I believe we have one more example. Yes, just another example of a ADU, a rear lot detached ADU. And you can see here, we estimated some of the parking. In this case here, the driveway already has enough space to accommodate the additional parking for it. So a lot of these lots, and again, this is a 7,500 square foot lot, will be very easy to put these units in. And that's really what we want. We didn't want to overburden, and we were concerned a little bit with the parking, but we feel that it's important to maintain that parking and to ensure that the spaces are there, but it's not that intrusive to the property owner on some of these lots to have that spot. So that is really, the ordinance broken down. There's a couple other things in here that I didn't get specific with, but I think that's going to give you kind of the gist of it. I want to, I'm going to go back to enforcement and just want to show, some of the things that we have in here. And I know we've had discussions on certificate of uses, whether appropriate or not. And this goes back to that policy to ensure compatibility and consistency with the neighborhood. So with ADUs for rent, we're requiring an annually renewed certificate of use. The original item did have for guest houses an annually renewed. That has been, there's a supplement that will be, the commissioner sponsored a supplement that will be on for November 1 that eliminates the annual renewal. It's a one-time certificate of use. However, if you convert that to an ADU for rent, then yes, you would have to convert that to an annually renewable CU. The information on the CU that we get up front as part and consistent with the floor plan and building plans, the size of the unit, whether its unit is attached or detached, the name of the occupants, vehicle registration information, and the maximum occupancy. Guest house and ADU, annual inspection, not for the guest house, yes for the ADU. Vacation rentals, we're getting that question quite a bit. A property cannot split between home occupancy and vacation rental, whether or not the principal residence or the ADU is vacation. It doesn't matter, you can't do it. So you can't live in the main house and rent out for vacation rental the ADU and vice versa. However, the entire site can be considered a vacation rental collectively. We have the violations that are built in. We typically do that with all new zoning ordinances that would require some type of certificate of use. There is a potential revocation. It takes a lot to get something revoked in this county. Again, it's built in, the language is in the ordinance. And the last point is on the homeowners association. So we're not going to police the HOA, whether and the property owner, whether or not the HOA permits ADUs or not. We're simply requiring the property owner to acknowledge that they've noticed the HOA. And we're doing that because the last thing we want is for a property owner to spend money on plans, to submit for a building permit, get it approved, then start building something, and then he realizes he has issues with his HOA. Granted, again, it's not our issue, but and the homeowner should always be aware what they can do in their HOA, but this gives some protection, and at least it could prevent a homeowner from going too far down the road with their financing and with their plans. So that's it. That's the presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Nathan. We have a series of amazing people on the call today. We wanted to start with Nathan so that we can kind of set the stage as to what exactly the ordinance is. Like Keith mentioned, we've had so many questions, and a lot of folks really are focusing on issues that they have seen already, right? So I think we have to be honest with the fact that we already have these dwelling units in our neighborhoods. So a lot of the feedback that we have gotten is from folks who have this in their neighborhood, and they want to understand how this ordinance changes it. And that's why I want to hear from Lourdes and then Rick. But just a quick shout out, because we kind of got started without introducing folks. I wanted to mention that we have with us Senator Ana Maria Rodriguez from the Miami Realtors, Annie Lord from Miami Homes for All, Laura Cadwell from AARP, and we have our amazing director of RER, Lourdes Gomez, who has been super patient with this item, as has Nathan, and our building code director, Ricardo Roig, is with us. I wanted to hear from Lourdes really quick, and then we'll go to Ricardo, because we really want to talk about the code enforcement, what's happening right now, and what folks can expect if this is approved next week. But first, Lourdes, thank you so much for all the time you and staff has spent on this. I wanted to give you a few minutes to give your 2 cents on the item and kind of the best practices that we've been discussing for several months in order to come up with this particular iteration.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you to all of you who are on the call for taking the time to listen to the presentation and learn about this. It's a very important policy step for our community, and we have to thank Commissioner Regalado for getting behind it and moving this forward, because we know that this is a controversial thing. It has been in every community that has adopted it, and it's extremely important that we enable additional housing within our community. So the commissioner knows, because she asked us to produce this item many months ago. I will say it was last year when she first asked. And, I think the reason she made some of the comments she made is because we really struggled to ensure that what we were putting forward was responsible and was going to be something that could be enforced. And I'm going to turn it over to our code enforcement chief, who by the way, has been doing this in the county for the last 30 years. So he is well acquainted with the different enforcement situations that we have had. He has faced the toughest ones over the years. And so, we really modeled a lot of this after, what his experience told us to do. So Rick, please go ahead.
Thank you, Lourdes, Commissioner and members of the community. Thank you for having us on. I can tell you, as Lourdes alluded to, we've been working on this ordinance now for probably close to 7 or 8 months. From my perspective, we've done some research across the country to see what's happening out there on a focus on enforcement, how we're going to be able to regulate the ADUs. And I would tell you that the biggest challenge that we've had has been with short-term rental. And we've learned a lot with the short-term rental to the point where we're utilizing some of the language from the short-term rental, such as the three-strike rule in this legislation. Additionally, the biggest issue has always been the parking and the noise. Parking is being addressed. And of course, the numbers of personnel in the house. Unfortunately, the definition of family was modified. And when I say unfortunately, look, times are different than when I did this 15 years ago, which was very simplistic. But now, you can have a multitude of individuals, their different names living in a house, up to 5 individuals that might not be related, but they're still considered family. So we've taken the time to go back and forth with the county attorney's office and the zoning staff to ensure that my field staff is able to enforce this regulation once it comes into law. We do have enough enforcement officers. We've been ramping up because of the short-term rental. Additionally, during the COVID, we were doing all the business checks out there. So we do have staff in place so that this takes effect. We're able to address it. And the last thing I would say is that this will help a multitude of individuals that I currently have under enforcement for having multifamily. And this will give them the ability to legalize and come out of the actual threat of the liens and so forth and so on. So I'm open for questions. Again, we addressed addresses, multitude. If there's 2 addresses or more, then there has to be a short-term or a ADU or a multifamily. So everything is literally cross-referenced with all the different codes. So there's nothing that's going to be able to jump from one area to the other without us putting a label to it. So that's all I have. Any questions?
Thank you, Rick. I just had one quick question, and I think we're seeing a lot of questions, so we'll answer all of them at the end. But just to clarify a point, this ordinance, as Nathan mentioned, creates a max unit of 1. A lot of the calls that we have been getting is folks are saying, I live in unincorporated Miami-Dade. There's a house in my neighborhood that's been subdivided, into 5 units, and there's 10 people living there. We don't want to legalize that, right? We all agree that that is absolutely wrong. Can you talk to us a little bit about that phenomenon? And also, one of the things that we've talked in our meetings, how a pathway for legalization for these other 1 units that are smaller, that are controlled, we know who's going to live there. We know who the tenant is. We have their names, we have all this information that we don't have currently for the illegal units, how that's going to free up your folks. They're going to do that inspection, right? But then they're not going to have to crack down. You kind of alluded to it, that you have a long list of folks that are doing these illegal units. Kind of what would that look like?
Thank you, Commissioner. So I would tell you that over the years, yes, we've been dealing with the simple fact of multifamily, a multitude of individuals that are renting different units within that residence. So this legislation allows you to have 1 unit, whether it's the garage, or which is considered an attached, or a detached unit that you can literally build. It's got to be the same height of the main structure. So you literally are not going to be able to build a 2-story to be able to just add an ADU. The great thing about this is that there's presumptions, and if you're out there renting like advertising, and that's a presumption that you're doing ADU or multifamily. So those are the things that we're able to enforce now that it's in the books, or will be in the books. Additionally, because they have to obtain a CU, they also have to provide a site plan and where those vehicles are going to be parked and who is going to be living in those units, tied to a tag. So the biggest complaints that we get is that there's vehicles being parked on my property across the street from this house. The ADU will literally force them to park on their own property and not be allowed. And so a violation of, again, parking on somebody else's property is being listed under ADU. Right now, I don't have that type of enforcement power where I can go and enforce somebody's vehicle parked on, let's say, the neighbor's property. They're allowed to, but this legislation will allow me to enforce that if that vehicle is supposed to be registered at the ADU and it's being parked down the street, I'm able to cite the ADU for having that vehicle parked outside of the parking. So that's another one that it's going to be the first for us in enforcing. There's no more defense that, oh, I forgot, I wrote the information incorrectly, I'm sorry. There's no defense to erroneous information, so we can revoke the ADU CU. They do have a right to go in front of a hearing officer to challenge that revocation. We love due process, but at the end of the day, somebody can't come in and say, oh no, the tenant, I forgot to add this tenant on the list when I first applied. Well, the ADU legislation requires you that if you change your tenants, that you come in and renew your CU at that point. So that will be a violation if they decide to change out tenants without coming in and updating the CU to include the tag for those individuals. Can't have multiple unit numbers. So right now we know that, we drive around and we see a unit number on a house. Now, because of this legislation, that's a presumption that they're doing ADU or multifamily. So I can cite them without have to go and knock on the door and ask them, hey, are you renting? You have an additional address for a unit and we don't have a CU. You're going to get notified that you need to come in and get a CU. Hopefully that answers some of the questions. I saw one of the notes in there. How are they going to get electricity? A ADU that is detached, they'll be able to get their own meter and their own electrical plumbing through the building permit process. So they'll be able to have a standalone unit with their own meters.
Rick, one of the things I wanted to ask you in terms of enforcement, currently you mentioned some of the tools that this ordinance is going to provide you with that will help enforcement. If you can just explain what the current enforcement, process is, because I think there's some confusion, as to, the lack of cracking down on these is one of the things that folks have asked about, and that's why you and I and Lourdes and Nathan, we've talked about kind of what's the best way, to give you the tools that you need. Obviously, you mentioned the cars, and now there's a presumption, but can you just tell us like what's occurring right now? How does it work right now?
So typically, if I get a complaint that there's multifamily taking place in a residence, the only option I have is to go see if there's any evidence of an additional door that has been added to the property. We can go knock on the door. They don't have to speak to us. I don't have police powers where I can literally get a subpoena to inspect the house. So really, there's the enforcement of multifamily is very restricted. I have to observe the violation. In other words, if the tenant allows in, that's a freebie. That I'm going to obtain all the evidence and move forward with that case. If they advertise on the news or newspaper or on the web, that's a mechanism that I can go and start the enforcement case, but that's a very weak enforcement case because in multifamily uses, there's no indication that if you advertise, but in the ADU, it's being listed as a presumption that if you advertise, then it's multifamily / ADU. So that's the great thing about the way we've written this ordinance, to be able to give our officers that tool that we just don't have under the state law currently, to be able to go into a property just by asking. If they tell me no, I have to go see a judge, and no judge is going to give me a right of entry on a single family residence unless there's a life safety. I have to see the life safety. So the chances of being able to get that subpoena, and I'm going to tell you, in 30 years, we've only gotten 2 subpoenas to be able to go into a residence that is occupied. Now, unoccupied residence, that's a little bit different. And so again, unoccupied residence, we're not dealing with an ADU. So I'm not even going to cover an occupied residence.
Rick, the other question that I wanted to ask you, we talked about the parking, the people. We're gonna have the information. One of the things that we've discussed is that when folks do this illegally, they have a tendency to continue to do illegal work without permits because they don't want an inspector. If you can speak to that, because there is a life safety issue with that keeps coming up. And I know that you've had several cases where that has in fact been what has triggered, right? Miami-Dade coming and citing.
Yeah, so typically we get the complaint from the tenants once they get ejected from the residence by the property owner for whatever reason. They're increasing the rent, or they're not paying, and so the property owner basically evicts them. We get the complaint, and we get the pictures. And a lot of times with these type of cases, we'll begin the case and we'll go through the courts up to having a judge force them to come in and pull the permit. But then there's others that typically we just don't have the evidence to be able to get in, but we know there's multifamily taking place. So we keep an eye on those properties. Hopefully we're able to get in. If we are not able to get in with this legislation, we're going to do a educational aspect to go through all of our cases and send out notifications to those that we've actually tagged as multifamily, which they have not corrected the violations, to come in and start legalizing. The legalization process is going to require building permits if they have modified. In the case of a garage, a lot of the multifamily take places in garages. And so if they want to still maintain the garage, they have to come in and pull the permits, the building permits, to legalize those garages. And I see there's a lot of those cases currently that we have on record. And so we're going to try to help them legalize those locations.
Great. Nathan, I wanted to ask you really quick, going back to what folks currently can and cannot do. I know that you covered it in your presentation, but just to clarify, because we're seeing like some questions asking the same thing over and over again. Currently, what is available under the code? Just to explain a little about what Rick was saying in terms of enforcement and how difficult it is to crack down on folks that are not in compliance.
So yeah, and I wanted to, there was another question too, and I think that was part of the first part of your question on there was a question here on that this is really now just allowing for duplexes and kind of going into the enforcement as well. I want to answer that because it's the farthest thing from being considered a duplex, and it's for several reasons. Number one is a duplex unit is counted as 2 individual dwelling units for the purposes of density. When we look at density throughout the county, when we do our calculations, the comprehensive plan is very, very clear. Because of these limitations on the size of an ADU, it's not considered as the unit is not considered as part of density. So that's one of the reasons why it's not considered a duplex. It's not an additional unit in the eyes of the policy that this board adopted. Number two, the massing of the structures is no greater than what you can do with a single family home. Whereas in duplex zoning, you have the right to develop a completely additional unit. And in essence, you have greater lot coverage, you have greater massing, you have reduced setbacks. These allowances for the ADUs are, again, within the footprint that is allowed for a single family home. And the third part is, again, the limit sizes. A duplex unit can be built and to facilitate the maximum theoretical under that existing zoning. You can put a very large structure and large unit. Again, with the size limitations and the number of people per bedroom, you're limiting, and of course the parking requirements, you're limiting the intensity on the use. So, and I think this goes into, again, with you're looking at electrical consumption, water and sewer, all that is reviewed at the time of permit, just like any other addition that is being made. In addition, the school district, they have their provisions with regards to their impact fees. They'll look at this. So if there's a theoretical possibility of having an additional student, they would be charged the same impact fees if you were expanding the size of a single family home.
Right.
So, yeah.
Thank you, Nathan. Really quick, in terms of what folks can build now, what is the process for now? Because you mentioned right now, there's no limitation on the cars, where they park them, how many, there's no limitations on the amount of people. We also don't know if they're renting it. We don't have a tenant list. We don't have registered vehicles. As Rick was saying, we can't enforce based on any of that. There's no presumption. What is the pathway presently for these additions?
Well, I mean, I think I would defer that back to Rick on how he enforced, but I mean, we really do not allow those additions, unless it's in a guest house form in the estate where they would come in for a building permit for those. So, if anything, by providing these standards, you're bringing, you're identifying potential violations. So if somebody built, let's say, 1,000 square feet illegally, and they're renting it out, which could be an overutilization of the site because it's so large, this brings it out and actually brings it to compliance and actually helps the neighborhood, because that structure shouldn't be there. So again, on how to enforce, I would get that back to Rick. But again, if anything, this provides us the opportunity to actually protect neighborhoods in a better way than people doing things illegally.
Right.
I don't know if Commissioner, just one point, I'm not sure if Rick is going to come back on, but just to reiterate one of the points he made, one of the key pieces here is, in fact, that we have the certificate of use process attached to it that is going to provide us, when you go to legally first build out the unit, right? Because, the first presumption, is going to be, we're going to look at, we have aerials, we have permit information. So we certainly have information in our arsenal with respect to what we know to be a legally permitted structure on a site. So that's, the first, I don't think Rick talked about that, probably because it's second nature to him, but that's the first point of information that staff would go to, is to, we can establish very easily if there is illegal construction or not. So that's a first step. And then as you go through that legalization process, all of those checks and inspections occur, right? Just as part of any building process, that will pertain, to this unit as well. And as part of that process, people will be asked to sign declarations about the use of the structure. And so that is going to be a key piece in the enforcement, and as in conjunction with that CU that is then later going to be obtained and updated in the case of the rental. So I don't want to, there certainly are, we have a lot of due process, and we deal with hearing processes on occasion, but I didn't want to leave you with the impression that there's an inability to pursue enforcement, because when we have nuisances in neighborhoods, we absolutely have cracked down on them very successfully.
Thank you, Lourdes. I wanted to pivot. I know that Ana Maria is on, and so is Danielle Blake. I don't know which one of you want to take the question for the realtors, but I wanted to ask you a little bit about what's happening in the market right now in terms of single family and why the industry is supporting this. We had an opportunity to talk about it a few times, and one of the things that I think is interesting is, for example, in new home construction, I know one of Lennar's most popular projects is Next Gen, which is a single family house that already has this built in. Ana Maria, if you could talk to us a little bit about, what you're seeing, or I don't know if Danielle wants to take it.
Danielle will be taking the lead. Thank you, Commissioner.
Perfect, thank you.
So this is something we've been advocating for years. Thank you, Commissioner, for taking this initiative. I know it can be controversial, but it's really important because, as you just mentioned, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I can bring them back to you. I know we had less than a 2-month supply of single family home inventory in Miami-Dade County at one point. We just don't have inventory out there. So you're giving this opportunity for people to live in. You know, and Nathan Kogan, you should be commended for all of the thought, and Lourdes, your team as well, because I can tell just from the last time that we spoke that you've made changes. You've put some thought into this. And so we're excited with the changes that we're seeing today. We still have a concern about the certificate of use, because what we're looking at is encouraging people to participate in this. And so the more barriers that you put up, that's going to be a challenge for us. I did also want to point out that under it's section chapter 163 under Florida statutes, it's 163.31771. The legislature has already encouraged local governments to come up with an accessory dwelling unit. And in there, it says that if you're, you know, when you're going through that building permitting process, that you're going to rent it to someone who's income qualified. And so getting back to some of the concerns in the chat regarding Save Our Homes and all of this, I think, Anna Maria, that's something that the Florida Senate is looking at addressing as well, maybe in this session. So if more local governments take this on and do step up to the plate and do this, then they're going to be addressing it as well.
I just wanted to, you know, and Danielle, I'm glad you brought up the CU, because I know we had talked about this before, you know, and listen, I understand, you know, and we're trying to find that right balance, you know, and I'm seeing the comments in the chat. You know, we had a lot of these same questions come up when the county chose to enable vacation rentals. And there were questions about what would happen to people's property tax exemptions. So, you know, I think the path the county chose at that time was, you know, education, and that people needed to be educated and make that determination for themselves as to whether or not potentially having one of these units would be worth their while. So we're certainly willing to, you know, participate as much as we can, you know, in promulgating that type of education. You know, I will say that we have studied, and Nathan and his staff, Alex Dambach is on. We looked at many examples across the country, and even locally, you know, here in Miami-Dade County, there are a lot of communities that already do have ADUs, but they have adopted it in such a restrictive form that really they have no effect on the net, you know, availability of housing. So we're really hoping that by allowing it to be built, right, that CU really becomes, we have a lot of annual CUs right now. We have a lot of home office CUs that are annual, the vacation rental CUs are annual. So, you know, this type of business that impacts the homeowner, I feel like we've gotten folks used to that model. We do everything online. So we try to make it super easy for people to fill information out. We have help available when they need it. The inspections occur the next day when they're applicable. So we're trying to do everything we can to have that regulation that's going to allow Rick to then pursue the compliance that, you know, he's going to need when we get those few cases. But at the same time, you know, not hamstring this so much that we don't, you know, enable the proliferation of the units. And I'm sorry, I'm talking too much, so mute.
No, thank you. Thank you, Lourdes. I really appreciate it. And listen, I wanted to add something, and I know that the issue of the certificate of use, you know, we've debated it internally many times, but I also, you know, think that it's important for us to have the information. We want to know who the tenants are, what the cars are. That's our way of limiting and ensuring that the correct amount of people are using the unit. And I think right now we don't have any of that. So this is already happening without any of that information. And I think that this process will also allow us to educate people on the choices that Lourdes was talking about. So we are going to disclose, you know, if you have Save Our Seniors and you're receiving, used to be $100, now $200 because you're low income, right? You need to consider that, because that may affect your eligibility, right? Because you're considered low income, and that's why you get that. Those folks have to decide. Do they want to get $200, you know, a year from the county, or do they want to get this rental income? If you have, you know, Save Our Homes, and, you know, you have to look at the square footage and decide, you know, you're going to be, you know, giving a certain amount of square footage and you're going to pay taxes on that. Does that make sense for you? So the process also allows us to disclose all these possible pitfalls to folks as they go through the application. And again, as a homeowner, and you know, property rights are essential, right, to our Constitution. they get to make that choice. What we're doing is we're providing a pathway. We're giving them that information. They get to educate themselves on how this will affect them and make that choice. This will not be for everyone, but folks will get all the information they need through this application process. And I think that we say we're going to educate people, and I think the county has done a great job educating folks, on the vacation rentals. But because this is an application, I think there's even more opportunity to educate folks as they go through this CU process. So the other question that I wanted to ask you folks is in terms of, buying and selling. Like I mentioned, this has become a big deal, right? Whether you have this or not. Obviously, folks sell homes with these illegal units. It puts you all in a difficult situation. I think a pathway is better for everyone. And like Rick was mentioning, once you get a violation, there's a series of other things that happen. In terms of legalizing existing, what do you all think what will be the impact long term?
I'm assuming this is still for me.
Well, I was asking for the realtors. Yeah.
I mean, the way that it has been explained to me is, like you said, it does create a problem when you go at the end, you're trying to do the closing and it's not legalized, you have to tear it down. That's the way that it exists currently. If there were a pathway to legalize it, to create that inventory, it would help. And it would be in compliance with government. Like Nathan said, it's not going to count against the density, but it does help with your housing element under the comp plan.
Right. Well, we have some other folks. I know Annie Lord is on here with us, and I wanted to give her an opportunity to talk about Miami Homes for All and their support. Annie, whenever we talk about the lack of availability, your name comes up. If you can please speak to that issue, because I think, we talk about adding inventory. Some of this inventory is already there, as Lord has mentioned. Some of it's being taken up by Airbnbs, and vacation rentals. Can you give us your perspective on the ordinance as written?
Sure. And thank you, Commissioner. And I really appreciate so many people on this on this call who have put in labor on this important initiative. That's months and months of work, I can tell. So, I mean, from our perspective at Miami Homes for All, we're terribly concerned about the supply of affordable housing. I think that we see this as an opportunity, in particular, to help people living in their homes today who may be on fixed incomes or even decreasing incomes, to help them remain in that home. So I think our primary reason for supporting an ordinance like this is that it's extremely incremental in nature. It's on relatively large sized parcels. So I think we see it as having a minimal impact on density, on congestion, schools. It's for the amount of land that it's going onto. It's really more about helping to preserve housing that exists today so that people aren't displaced from that. So we're really happy about that. I do think it will add additional stock that, I think people will take it up. And it is my hope that and because it will be a regulated thing, and, the upside, I think, as you've highlighted here, Commissioner, and others, the upside of having an annual CU is that this is this is a way of monitoring this increase in stock, so that, you don't have a situation where you have, more than the allowable number of residents, for example, the two individuals, and you don't have the more than the allowable number of vehicles, right? So this, I do think, is putting some guardrails up for the kinds of changes that I think, are the concerns that many residents have, that I think are reflected here in the comments. I think we have to be, as a community, without forcing anybody to take too much of the burden, right? But I think as an entire county, we have to be looking at what are the incremental opportunities for us to recognize and address the shortage that we have. So I do feel that this is, adding a lot of value, both to residents and to homeowners and to our elderly in particular, because I do think this is a prime service population. I think young people too, and the elderly and youth, this is the face of our homeless population. And if we do nothing, I mean, I don't mean to be scary, but I just think this is a fact. And I think we heard it, even you have senior members of the Chamber of Commerce who are acknowledging this in public forums now, which is that we are headed to a situation. If we do nothing, we are headed to a street homelessness crisis like we have not seen in this community for 25 years. And like you're seeing in other communities across the country, it is totally unmitigated. So we really have to do things that will create supply. And I think this is a very important incremental measure towards doing that. It's do things now or pay a lot more later to address a much worse problem. So I guess I'm very pleased about this. I think this is the right kind of initiative that we need to be taking. As we can see, it's hard fought, right? It's not simple. I'm very impressed with how much research has gone into it and how much consideration and discussion with people who are in the know and stakeholders that have been following these kinds of policies for a long time. So I think this is how good policy gets made. And also we're going to learn a lot, right? And so this is from my perspective, right? I think the county has done everything it can I don't think it's taking anything into, anything lightly, right? I think it's really trying to plan for every eventuality. But from my perspective, we're also going to learn a lot about what gets created here and what happens in communities and whether there are real barriers put up by an annual CU and what benefits come from an annual CU and how we can maybe make shifts in the future. So, this is the kind land use policy for me is the kind of thing you just look at. It's like constant. You just look at year in, year out, because we learn stuff and it affects markets and it affects neighborhoods. So we have to be making adjustments. So while I can't imagine, I can't foresee anything negative, perhaps there will be opportunities for us to be, as a community, encouraging minor amendments, right? So these are, I really commend you, Commissioner. The way that you approach policymaking, I think, is an example for all.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Annie. Thank you so much. And thank you for your support on this. I don't think that there is a silver bullet, and you and I have talked about it, but I think there are a lot of different things, right, that we need to do in order to give folks opportunities. And really, this initiative was started by questions from seniors, asking, how do we stay in Miami-Dade County? And not necessarily, low income seniors. People who are retired, who paid their homes and now they have to pay insurance. They want to invest in making their homes resilient. And they want to stay in Miami-Dade County, right? And when you add all those things together, they ask kind of what are my options, and how can I do it like securely? Because we talk about the fact that people are doing this illegally, but the alternative is also just to rent a room in your house, right, without creating a separate structure and live with whoever that person is, right? Just get a bunch of roommates. And I represent certain areas where people are doing that. So that's another reality that we face, right? And that's a different conversation, but the idea is to give folks a pathway, right? And speaking of the elderly, I want to give an opportunity to Samarja, who is with us from the AARP. I'm so grateful for their support, the work that they're doing in this field statewide. Really is, Danielle mentioned that the state has taken a position, currently gently asking counties and cities to do this work. There is the gentle ask, and then then we get preemption, right? From our friends at the state. So we try to get ahead of those and show that we're being proactive. But a lot of those recommendations come from the work that AARP is doing and the surveys that they have, the data that shows actually what is happening with the elderly population in the state. So I'd like to give Shamir an opportunity to speak on the issue. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think, first of all, I just want to thank your leadership on this issue. And I have had the opportunity to work on ADU legislation across the country. I worked for the DC office as the government affairs director and lead the housing advocacy. And this legislation that I'm looking at, it's a very strong legislation. It is going to help a lot of seniors. From our perspective, ADUs is something that we really support. We understand that Commissioner, you used the right word, saying there is no magic bullet for solving affordable housing. At least not in my lifetime will I see one legislation solving affordable housing. We have to look at different parts of it. And ADUs is one of those housing options or options that will help towards not solving affordable housing, but actually helping it. From our perspective, ADUs is something that will help seniors not only age in place, but also provide an opportunity for to downsize, to move into the ADU, and then you can also rent out the primary unit, or you can have a situation, at least in this day and age, you can have caregivers living in the ADUs, and you can have support in that sense also. So we have had surveys, as Commissioner, you pointed out, where the survey specifically mentioned that 75% of them would like to stay in the current homes. More than 60% would consider building ADUs, and for reasons such as providing a home for their relatives, providing homes for caregivers, or getting an extra income. So there are lots of positives about ADUs, and it's not a new concept. It's been there for a long time. One of the most famous persons to have ever lived in an ADU was Fonzie from Happy Days, if you have ever seen that. So it's not like it's a new concept. It's been there since then. I know there are lots of illegally ADUs going on. I'm glad that there will be a situation where you will give time to the homeowner to at least get those ADUs legalized and up to code, which is really important. So thank you so much for taking this on and taking this important issue. If there's one question I can ask, actually it was for Nathan. It's about the difference between guest house and ADUs. ADUs is like an independent unit where you have a kitchenette, a room to live in, and bathrooms, whereas guest house may not have those aspects. May just be a room, or it may just have one bathroom and no kitchenette. So in terms of that zoning thing, has that been differentiated in the...
So I think that's a really good question. So if you build within your main house an additional bedroom with a bathroom but not a kitchen, that's just an expansion to your house. A guest house actually does have a bedroom, bathroom, and kitchen, and that's the benefit of having this guest house, where you have your ancillary dwelling unit. Really, the composition of a guest house, the physical layout of the guest house and ancillary dwelling unit are nearly the same. In fact, they're exactly the same, other than a guest house already having the privilege of being larger than 800 square feet on some of these estate lots. That's why we primarily kept it in the code. The main difference between the guest house and the ADU is that a guest house cannot be rented out. So at the time the person comes in for their certificate of use, they're going to be signing a declaration of restrictions indicating they're not going to rent it, that it's generally for family, that meets under the definition of family. Whereas an ADU is rented out. Again, a guest house is hooked up to the same electrical, same address as the house, but an ADU is rented out. That's the prime difference.
Okay. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Appreciate the question.
Thank you, Commissioner, for providing me with the remarks.
Thank you. Thank you for your support. We also have Eddie Blanco, who is the chair of Miami Realtors. If you wanted to chime in.
Oh, you're muted, Eddie.
Thank you. Hi, thank you, Commissioner Regalado, for putting this forward. We definitely do have a inventory issue here in South Florida, and we love the idea, the proactive approach. As Danielle mentioned, the issue of, I wanted to get a point of clarification as it relates to the CU. What is the intention of the interior inspection on existing, right? So if you have an existing person who wants to, they already have an efficiency and they want to
Legalize it.
Legalize it. Getting the interior inspection outside of the building department with code and making sure there's code, is there an extra need for a CU, and what is that need? I did hear you mention understanding who is living there in terms of names and the knowing what cars are parked there. Both of those are very important points, but wouldn't require interior inspection. So that was my point of clarification that I'd like to understand. We definitely support the idea, and we do need to create a housing stock. And as Annie mentioned, the importance of being able to provide an outlet for people who have decreased income or limited income to be able to stay in their homes. That's critical.
So,
Commissioner,
oh.
let me take this one, Nathan.
Go ahead.
What we're trying to avoid is the situation, and I see some of the texts that are being posted. The rooming house situation that we face a lot, where we allow, for example, one room to be rented, and that turns out to be such a great benefit that they look at another room and says, okay, let's rent that room. And now you have potentially 3 to 4 different individuals renting from the same location. So that increases the numbers of vehicles, the noise, and it creates the problem that you're seeing in the text that are being posted is, the density issue. So by having that inspection, we're looking to make sure that there's been no additional modification, bring any additional individuals into the home to avoid, again, the presumption that we're going to make sure that we're taking care of the neighbors' concerns, that not additional bodies are being brought in. And of course, making sure that the tags are being updated, or that they are updated of the individuals living there. That's really the reason why we're doing that inspection. And of course, also the life safety potential. If we see any type of life safety, make sure that we protect that tenant.
And Rick, one of the things I would add that, Lourdes was talking earlier about lessons learned from the Miami-Dade County ordinance that was done before my time on vacation rentals is a lot of neighbors want this information, right? They want to know, like, who's there, what are their cars, what's going on this property. And obviously that's very difficult for vacation rentals. But for these units, it's one of the things that we believe will provide the neighbors, with important information, and will help us to control the amount of people in the unit and the cars, and what are 85% of the complaints, right? So like we were saying, the bulk of the complaints are about how many people, how many cars, and the noise. So this is a way to curtail that and to ensure that if folks, are doing this, that they're also being mindful that they're within these rules, and that we don't change the character of a neighborhood. You guys alluded to the 3 strikes you're out. We were very clear about, the violations, specifically with the parking, and the amount of humans, so that, this is a privilege and it gets revoked if you don't follow the rules. And we're going to disclose that very clearly. This is an opportunity for folks, but we also don't want them to take this and turn it into something that it is not. And that is a, rooming house. One of the questions I saw quickly, we're going to try to go through the questions. Some of them are repetitive.
To add that the property owner has to live on the premises. Yeah. And either they're going to have an ADU or they're going to do short term, but they can't do both.
Right. And again, this is one unit, right? Because for the folks keep asking us about multiple units. This is one unit and one unit only. So it's very clear. It's limited. Nathan, if you can remind us of the square footage, too, so that folks understand, because there's a few questions regarding the number of units and rooming houses and dividing up houses and what neighbors are doing that is clearly illegal.
Yeah, you're limited between 400 and 800 square feet. So 800 is your maximum. And again, kind of to further the inspection and the necessity for it, so at the time they get their CU, at the time they get their permit, they're submitting a floor plan, and that will show the number of bedrooms, and that will then be able to calculate the number of people. So when we go in the next year and we check to say, hey, if they did some interior remodel and added a bedroom, they're in violation, and we need to recalculate and reanalyze and see if it's possible that is consistent or not. Regardless, once they've augmented that unit, they're not consistent with the CU, and we take enforcement action against them. So yeah, it's a good way of ensuring compatibility.
One of the questions that I wanted to respond to, I'm trying to scroll through them to see which ones we haven't responded to in our conversation. This is only for unincorporated Miami-Dade County. However, I am meeting with the League of Cities. I mean, we spent a lot of time and energy on this. So one of the things that I've mentioned to some of the cities that have asked us about it is that we're happy to provide them with information and kind of how we got, to this and the different things that we were considering in case they want to run with it. Some folks have asked me, why I have not drafted this ordinance to be county-wide. I do not believe that the county should take zoning away from the cities. I was very clear with that during the RTZ process. And I believe that firmly these are decisions that municipalities need to make. But I think that the work that the county has done is going to be very valuable. And a lot of folks are interested in that work. I was trying to get to the other questions. Let me see. I don't know if you guys can see any of them. Oh, we have one question really quick about insurance. If doing this would change their insurance policy. I don't know. Danielle, do you know the answer to that?
I mean, it could change your insurance policy, but that's part of the benefit of doing this is that you're going to have an income stream to help. And I noticed that she said her insurance went up, as did mine, as did probably everyone here. Across the whole state, insurance is going up. So this is a good thing of having this ordinance is you'll have some income to offset those increases.
Right. And like I mentioned, a lot of the folks that reached out to us and asked about this, one of the things that they want to do is make their homes more resilient to lower the insurance, right? So there's folks that are saying, look, my house is paid or almost paid, but I want to do a metal roof. I want to do the impact windows. I know that that's going to lower my insurance by a few $1,000s, but how do I do that? I'm going to incur that debt. How do I pay that back? And this was one of the things that they were considering. So, again, folks have to make their choices. Right. This is just about giving them different options. Annie, you had your actual hand up, not your virtual one.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. I was also wondering, and forgive me if this ended up getting covered in another arena, but Audrey and I were wondering if there was any prospect, for example, of code enforcement collected from fees and fines collected from illegal short-term rentals, for that being able to cover some of the additional costs that folks might confront if, for example, in application fees for the CUs, something like that. So, or to even cover the enforcement of code. Is there a way that the revenue collected from the additional tax revenue could cover code enforcement? I was just wondering if there were ways that the revenues could be, addressing some of the concerns raised in the chat.
Well, actually, today, the revenue from code enforcement supports the code enforcement staff. And fully, there's not general fund support for code enforcement in the unincorporated municipal service area, which is actually, it's unique, and it's, we tried very hard to, it's a model, I think, where the law-abiding taxpayer does not have to subsidize the violator. So I don't know if that strikes you as good or bad. I mean, I find it to be a very fair system. If you're not, part of the problem, you're not paying for that service. So we've been able to be self-sustaining for many years now. So I don't know that there would be room to divert the funds. I will tell you that we have the lowest CU fee that we have, and that's what would be attached to this. It would be the $36 is our online CU fee, and inspections are $86, I believe. So we're trying to keep it low cost. It's certainly, when you think of the price of any of any inspector going to your home, any home repair, you can't get someone out to your house for less than $150 or $200 just to go tell you what the problem is. So we try to benchmark ourselves, in terms of our inspection and permit costs. We try to keep them low. So I hope that answer helps. I don't know.
Yeah, thank you. That's great to hear.
Really quick, Danielle, I had a question because it's come up a few times. some folks are saying, well, if I have to pay for the construction and I have to pay more taxes because this square footage, whether it's 400 or 800, is going to be, carved out, does this really make sense? What is the going rate, for these things? I mean, I know it's different areas. I remember when, an efficiency in the city of Miami was $500. Right now I see the signs and they're like 1,800. So if you could give us an idea, in terms of the market, what that looks like.
Thank you, Commissioner. We did this demonstration project in South Miami and it was 480 square feet. It's the container home. And I think what we learned from that project is it wasn't the container home itself that cost so much, it was preparing the land. The sewer lateral connection, for example. We budgeted 10 to 15,000. The first quote that came in was $40,000 to connect that. Our second quote was 32,000, and we finally got a private vendor for 20,000. So those are some of the more expensive sides of construction. It's not necessarily the home itself.
In terms of the market rate for these units, do you have an idea?
I could take that question.
Take that one, Eddie.
Yeah.
But
I'm
with
because
one-
I'm
if
on
I'm gonna
the
set you
on
up
the
with
ground. Yeah.
I'm gonna set you up with this one though. It's the
Yeah,
connection fees that like you
Yeah,
can see,
thank
you
you.
can order this on Amazon and it costs this much. You can't do that in Miami-Dade County. Go ahead, Eddie.
Yeah, as far as the market rents, Commissioner Regalado, I think you have the market, a good pulse on the market. Yeah, that's about right. About $1,800 for an efficiency. That would probably be around the average for an efficiency, and somewhere between $1,500 and $1,800, and so that's supplying more opportunities for legal efficiencies would be a good way to maybe balance the market out a little bit.
Right. Nathan, I know that you answered this, but we keep getting the question about the school board. I can tell you as a former school board member that obviously there is a process where they look at how many additions, new development. It's a concurrency. Actually, concurrency is done twice a year, and those numbers come out. But Nathan, if you can answer that question again about the school board, because we've had it asked a few times in terms of, will this impact school overcrowding?
So yeah, you're absolutely correct. They update their numbers every year. So every additional student in that area is counted towards the total capacity. So any project that we look at in the area, and even these ones, will be analyzed for concurrency. Additionally, any expansion to residential will require the additional payment of school impact fees. That is, one of the services that will be, directly taken care of just through the general process.
And right now, like I mentioned before, when we were talking about the CU, this is already happening, and those people are off the grid, right? So there are children living in these illegal units, and that's completely off the grid, and the school district is not capturing that. So with this application, right, if there is a child there, it's a different conversation, right? Because now we'll actually have those numbers, we'll have those tenants, we'll know if they have a child, and like we mentioned at the beginning, it's 2 adults, and 1 child under 3. So if you have a child that's school age, that's going to be counted as an adult.
That's correct.
All right, folks. There's a few other questions. Nathan, I wanted to, I guess that one, if you can check too. There's a few that are asking the question, like, how is this? I think you already answered that. Like, how is this not a duplex? How is this not turning, single family into multifamily?
Yeah, that's correct. Again, when the policy was created and analyzed as part of the planning process, and again, historically, municipalities across the country don't consider them as part of the density calculation. And this goes back early 50s and 60s. And when the size is regulated and the massing is regulated to fit the context of the community, it doesn't represent that additional density is. So, that it's not multifamily in the eyes of the policy. It's not multifamily in the eyes of the code. I think there was another one here on. I'm just looking at the questions here. If a single family home converts to multifamily, would that increase the cost? Again, it's not, would not be considered multifamily. Yeah, I'm not seeing any other questions.
Yeah, I see one other question about unincorporated Miami-Dade. So I actually do represent unincorporated Miami-Dade. There are commissioners that only represent incorporated areas, and there are commissioners that represent both, like myself, and there are districts that are fully unincorporated. This is going to be before the county commission on November 1st. So the county commission will speak on this. It already had its first reading. It's going to have its second reading, and that's why we were having this informational session. And we're going to be posting this. Obviously, if you have questions, you can also email us. You can participate in the meeting on November 1st. And I know that a lot of our panelists, including myself, whose teenager just walked into the room, have mommy duties. It's officially mommy time. So we're gonna wrap it up. Thank you all so much. And we look forward to hearing from you on November 1st. Like I said, I think everyone has done an amazing job. I want to thank everybody for their time and their talent and their support on this. Thank you.